name's Ketevan. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, and a very special welcome for the second installment of What Parisians Are Reading on the Metro. I suppose that's what we're calling it, right? So yeah, back in the spring, I mentioned this in the first installment. I looked up at someone randomly and noticed the book that they were reading and said, oh wow, that seems like a really interesting book. I'm curious about it, and looked it up and said, oh yeah, I definitely want to read this book. And then that was sort of like a light bulb moment that I should maybe pay attention to what people are reading. Like normally I never, like if it's right in my face, I might look and notice, but I never like, you know, I'm wandering and like checking out and like, you know, peering over to see what everyone is reading. So essentially after that first moment, I started doing that. I started paying attention, jotting the books down, and very quickly I accumulated a very large list of books. So that's when I put out the first video. And that was in the spring. And so over the summer, I actually haven't been in Paris that much. I've been traveling quite a bit. So the list took a little bit longer, and it's not as long as the original one, but I think I'm going to turn this into like a quarterly thing for each season of the year, just because I think that's the right amount of content that probably I want to make and people want to see. So this is sort of the summer edition of the things that people are reading on the Metro in Paris. So we'll just dive right in. So the list is actually going to be organized thematically, not necessarily in the order that I saw them. So the beginning, the most important to me, and I think the most interesting to you, is probably the chunk of books where I'm like, ooh, yes, adding that to my TBR, because that's, I mean, the real reason I do this. As fun as these videos are, like if every book I saw on the Metro, I was like 0% interested in reading it, I wouldn't do this. So this is like the most exciting part for me. First one on this list is The Mad Woman of Serrano by Dina Salustio, I believe is her name. And this is actually, like, when I looked up this book, it's so fantastic. It's the first book, or the first book written by a woman from Cabo Verde, which is a very small country in Africa. And it's also the first book ever from that country to be translated into English. So like, woof, very cool. I'll just read you out the description. Serrano is an isolated village where a mad woman roams. But is she really mad, or is she marginalized because she is wise and a woman? Could her babbling be prophecy? One day a girl falls from the sky and is found in the forest by Geronimo. The villagers are suspicious of the newcomer, but Geronimo falls in love with her. I'm sure that's not how you, I'm sure it's like Geronimo or something, but anyway. When she gives birth and disappears, he takes care of the child, naming her Felipa. Years later, estranged from her father after being taken from the village, the daughter becomes a successful businesswoman in the city, and her memories of growing up in Serrano and her friendship with the mad woman become increasingly vivid. And when the mad woman's warnings come true and Serrano's shelter existence is threatened by plans to build a dam, the father heads for the city himself. Will he and his daughter finally be reunited? So it's magical realism. It also sounds like a little bit of eco-fiction, and definitely post-colonial. You know, I think the dam thing, I read that like Cabo Verde is very green, actually. It's like only over 20% of their power or something comes from green sources. So yeah, this looks super interesting. It has almost no ratings on Goodreads, less than 100. I'm like very excited for this one. So that's The Mad Woman of Serrano. And next up we have, of course, Émile Zola. What would this list be without something by Zola? So this one's called The Belly of Paris, which I've never heard of these books before. It's part of a series called, in French, it's called Les Rougeons Macquart. I'm not sure how to say that. But yeah, it's a multi-generational saga. The Belly of Paris is the third in the series. So I won't read out the whole thing, but basically a wrongly accused man who escapes imprisonment comes back to Paris, doesn't recognize Paris because it's basically in that Haussmann period where things are being torn down and the boulevards are being made. So he's trying to get back on track, and he gets caught up in a dangerous maelstrom of food and politics. So a lot of this is like in the market, you know, where Leal, like right now Leal is like a mall, but before it was like an actual marketplace where people would come and trade and sell things. So yeah, it's definitely looks interesting. It offers the blurb says it offers a fascinating perspective on the French capital during the Second Empire, and of course tantalizing descriptions of its sumptuous repasts. So yeah, that definitely sounds interesting, but I probably obviously wouldn't read this book before the first two in the series. but that's what sort of like introduced me to the series. For those of you that are interested, the first two of the series, or at least the first one of the series, is called The Fortune of the Rougon, and then the second one is La Curée, or that's probably the name in French, but enough to go find it. Oh wow, and this series, okay, this must be a famous series because there's like 20 books in it. Yeah, I haven't read any Zola, and I don't really like know his works very well, but I'm sure this is maybe more well known than I initially realized. Okay, cool. So that's Zola, and then the second is Virginie Despentes, more French literature, and this one is I'm not even sure how to say this. Vernon Subutex. Yeah, so it's basically about this guy Vernon. He runs a record store. And he basically, I guess, was like funded by this rich rock and roller or something, and then when the rock and roller dies, he loses the store, and he kind of has to end up like busking or being homeless or something, and then apparently some sort of Facebook comment like changes everything, and I don't know, it just sounds like such a wild and wacky story. And this is again part of the series. The book I saw was the first one in the series, but there's 3 books in the series, I believe, and so I'm just curious to like get into this series and see what's going on. But Virginie Despentes is very like rock and roll. She's a filmmaker. She's very like out there. She's a former sex worker. Her stories are very much like wild, to put it simply. So I'm definitely interested in this one, and it's been on my list before I even saw it on the Metro, so that's always a good sign. So for this next bit, normally I put all the books that aren't available in English translation at the end, just because I don't think they're as interesting for you or me, since we're probably not going to be reading them. Unless you're French and you speak French, then go for it. But this one book I'm super intrigued by, and it's not available in English translation, but I might pick it up in French to try to read it at some point, so I want to keep it on this side of the list because I'm actually super interested. So anyway, it's called Cœur du Sahel, which is like the heart of the Sahel, and it's from Cameroon, and it's about a young girl living in the mountains, and her whole family, or no, sorry, not her whole family, her stepfather, so the breadwinner, has disappeared during a Boko Haram raid, and she decides to go to a town so that she can work as a domestic servant and earn some money to help her family. And it's just basically her adjustment to like urban life and how difficult it is to come from a small village and you know, survive the city kind of thing. So yeah, this seems super interesting, and I hope it gets a translation soon. It did win a Prix Goncourt des Lycéens, which I think is it like like not the children's, but like I think it's like the kind of like the Teen Choice Awards of like French literature. Like they get kids to actually decide which books like speak to them the most. I don't know if it's a proper literary prize. I mean, it is because it's the Prix Goncourt, but like it's a separate category. So I don't know. It seems like it's like ripe for possible translation. So fingers crossed that actually happens. But yeah, so for now it's just available in French. But yeah, super interesting. So, and then we have The Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe. So this one, I haven't read anything by him before either, but again, very famous, like, you know, author. And this one is his first novel. And it's a diary form of a young man hopelessly in love with a woman who's married to his friend. So this is clearly a theme throughout the ages of time in Western culture. You know, gotta be in love with your best friend's wife, of course. But anyway, it was published obviously over 200 years ago, but it's what we would consider autofiction nowadays because he kind of had his own situation that was very similar. And yeah, so I just think that it's an interesting story and a good classic to read. It kind of came right before Romanticism, but it had that, I think, that style of like longing and, you know, excessive descriptions. So yeah, this one is on my list officially now. I hadn't heard of it before. And then this one is kind of like in the beginning of the books that I'm not super interested in reading. For this book in particular, I would read it if like a book club picked it or something, but I'm not going to ever pick it up. I think it's not my style. You probably all know what it is. It's called Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. So yeah, like this is a very, very popular book. You all know what it's about. You go to a coffee shop, it's a special coffee shop, and you, I think if you order a cup of coffee, you can go back in time until the coffee that you're served gets cold. So it's like a limited amount of time. So yeah, it's fantasy, magical realism. I think a lot of people really love this book. But yeah, someone was reading it in French, I think. So yeah, that was fun to see. Next, we have all genre fiction, I think, until the very end. So this one is A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. This one is like a Greek retelling, modern Greek retelling. It was the first in the Hades and Persephone's saga. So it's part of a series. And yeah, I think this is kind of like how Persephone and Hades like meet. So yeah, I'm not super into Greek retellings right now. I have read a few and I probably will read them in the future. And this one looks particularly interesting because of the Hades Persephone pairing. So yeah, that one looks super fun. And then we have Keep Me Safe by Maya Banks. This one was read in French, and it took me quite a long time to figure out what it was in English because it's Protège-moi en français. And so it's part of the Slow Burn series, and I think this is just straight romance, yeah. Oh no, sorry, paranormal romance? Based on the description, I thought it was magical realism or fantasy because someone has some sort of like power to help them find things. But I'm guessing that means she's an alien. Sorry if that's a spoiler, but it's right there in the Goodreads. I don't know. So this one looks like a fun romance with a little bit of paranormal twist. And then The Last to Vanish by Megan Miranda. This one I think is another thriller mystery, and yeah, it's one of those like in a rural area in North Carolina, something happens. I'm terrible at like describing thrillers. They're just not my jam. But yeah, it does seem interesting. Sorry, I'm just not I'm not amping these books up the way I normally would if I read them and enjoyed them myself, but I'm trying, okay? Like, it seems like a very nice thriller. I'll say that. This next one is A Heart Full of Headstones. It's number 24 in an Inspector Rebus, I think is how you say it, series by Ian Rankin. I think he's a quite popular thriller or crime mystery guy. So yeah, so this one looks like a very popular series, so I'm sure that's popular for a reason. It has quite good reviews. It's about an infamous cop at the center of decades of misconduct has gone missing, so now we have to find him, or the main character has to find him. Yeah, that looks interesting as well. And then we have The Black Moon by Winston Graham, the Poldark saga. This is historical fiction, and I can't actually even tell from the description like what part of history it is. I have the Goodreads tag says it's 18th century British, but yeah, it's just basically like a fight between two families, and I think there's a love story, you know, kind of Romeo and Juliet type of deal. It doesn't really go into much more. It looks very popular, very well rated, so interesting. It's very long. It's also 600 pages. Okay, so, and then we have The Essex Serpent, more historical fiction from the UK, I believe. This one's sort of exploring the, you know, movement and pull between myth and modernity. Yeah, and like scientific, like, you know, faith and like old ways and scientific advancement and achievement and that kind of stuff. So also looks interesting. And then this is our one little nonfiction throw in. It's called Manufacturing Happy Citizens, How the Science and Industry of Happiness Control Our Lives. I don't even know what, I think this must have been originally in English. I saw it being read in French. Oh, you know what? I don't think I actually fully read this. I think I'm gonna move this to the section of books I might want to read actually. Because you know, at first I thought it was like what policies will make people happier, but I think it's actually, you know, taking that discussion and then arguing that like maybe we shouldn't be letting governments decide what makes us happy, and it's quite oppressive in fact. So actually, yeah, this I think might add to my own list. But yeah, it sounds super interesting. I'll just read out the bottom part. With a healthy skepticism, this book documents the powerful social impact of science and the industry of happiness, arguing that the neoliberal alliance between psychologists, economists, and self-development gurus have given rise to a new and oppressive form of government and control in which happiness has become woven into the very fabric of power. So yeah, that looks actually interesting. Clicking want to read right now, actually. You can tell how much I've prepared for these videos, clearly. So this next bit is going to be all of the French literature that isn't available in English translation. So I think it's interesting, but not as interesting for everyone, because if you don't speak French, you can't read it. So yeah, the first one is Attendre l'aube. I think is how you pronounce that. It means reaching dawn. And I still am not sure what this is about. I've read the whole synopsis in an attempt to figure it out. But it starts off by saying, Reaching Dawn is a love letter to my great aunt Georgie. Whimsical woman, adored woman, inspiration. Georgie, whose presence and voice I miss so much since she's no longer here. It is nonfiction, but it's like a story that she's telling about her family. So yeah, it doesn't really quite say exactly what it's about, other than it's the story of the women in her family. But it seems interesting. So yeah. Next one is Dame de Cour by Alexis Lequet. I honestly, the description on Goodreads is like nothing, so I can't even tell what this is. It looks like maybe romance. But yeah, there's not even a description for me to go off of. And then we have La Boîte à Magique. This one is, I don't know, it's Camilla Lackberg, Swedish. So it's a Nordic writer for sure, and it's like a noir thriller very popular in Nordic countries, and this one's translated into French. That's what I saw being read, and it hasn't been translated yet into English as far as I know. So The Magic Box, it's the first in a Mina and Vincent series. Yeah, it's just going to be a thriller. And then we have Louison ou le exquise. I think it's exquisite, but in French, that I just definitely cannot say that word. And again, it's the first book in a series. So it's set right before the French Revolution, and it's just following the illegitimate child of one of the dukes in that era, and like what she's doing in her life, how she's like trying to figure out stuff, because it's, I think, a little bit difficult when you're illegitimate. And yeah, so it's kind of just like a fun historical fiction, not available in English. And then we have, last but not least, I actually have this in my want to read myself section, but then I noticed that it was 500 pages, and the description was so short and basic that it couldn't possibly be everything. And then I noticed that it was independently published, and I realized, this is probably like Christian lit, but for Islam. So it's called Étrangère by this woman called Isa, I assume, which I think is a pseudonym because it's not like there's any author bio out there. And it's basically about a Muslim girl who is tempted because her neighbors are betting against her to like do something wrong or do something immoral, and that's the whole synopsis. But for 500 pages, like, there has to be more than that, and I realized it probably isn't more than that. It's probably just different ways that she's being tempted, and she's like, you know, stopping herself from being tempted, which is totally fun. Like, that can be fun for a lot of people to read. I know I appreciate Christian lit every once in a while. I don't think I would appreciate like Muslim lit, if that's what we're calling it. I don't know. So yeah, it's on the list. It's independently published. I don't think it's ever going to be translated into English, but it's there if you're super interested. So that's going to be the end of our list for this summer of 2023. Stay tuned for a few months. The fall edition, I'm guessing, will be ready and waiting for you. But until then, the last video, a lot of people commented how it's such a sad thing to not be seeing people reading in public anymore. And I think that's partially a technology thing, you know, with ebooks and audiobooks. Like, no one would ever guess that I'm reading a book, even though I always am. But also, I think that you know, it is something that people consider more private nowadays. Like, they don't want their reading choices like out and about. Yeah, so let me know what your thoughts are on that. I mean, a lot of you are on YouTube, so like you aren't protective of what you're reading, but for a lot of people, I think they keep it more private, or they don't necessarily want to like advertise what they're reading. Do you feel like that's become more prevalent lately, because now we have the option to do it by keeping it on an ebook or an audiobook? So yeah, I'm just curious as to what people think about that. And if you have any special requests or questions, feel free to ask them down below. And until next time, bye.